Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our Foundation Educational Webinar Series. My name is Brian Cancian, Business Development Manager with Foundation Software. It is the top of the hour, and we are still waiting on some attendees to trickle in here. So we're going to just hold for a few minutes. Just stick around, and we'll be right back with you. All right, it's about 3 minutes after the hour. I think we'll get started while we have a few others trickling in here. I'd like to welcome you all back to our educational webinar series. My name is Brian Cancian, again, Business Development Manager here at Foundation Software. I'm happy to bring you into another conversation with Eldar Sadikov on the cost of materials these days and everything that's going on in the world with tariffs and so on and so forth. Should be a really good presentation today. Looking forward to all the information that Eldar has to present. And I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping before I hand it off. For those of you who have not been in attendance with us before, we will have a Q&A session at the end. There is a question mark icon up at the top of your control panel there. That is where you can find your questions pane. Please feel free to type your questions in really at any time throughout the presentation, but we will not be addressing those questions until the very end when we open it up for Q&A. Just prior to turning it over to Q&A, there will be a poll to pop up on the screen. If you could all just participate in that poll, we'd very much appreciate it. What else? There will be a recording of this and presentation materials provided. Those will be emailed out within probably the day or two post webinar. So that is that. And I think that is pretty much it. Again, with us today from Field Materials, we'll have Eldar Sadikov, CEO, and we'll turn it over to Eldar right now, do more introduction and take it from there.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate the introduction. Welcome everyone again to this webinar. Very excited to be here. This is the second webinar we're doing this year on this topic. Material prices are. I'm actually realizing that share screen did not work. Give me a second. Let's see, share. Okay, now it's working. Brian, can you confirm that the screen is visible?
The screen is visible.
Awesome. Okay. All right. Well, again, welcome everyone. Material prices is a hot topic because of all the conversations we had about tariffs. We still have tariffs with a number of countries at the moment, and it's definitely impacting prices. There's also a little bit of a concern around inflation. What are the numbers going to look like through the end of the year? So today I'm very excited to talk about what we're seeing on our end, on field materials end, and I'll explain how we know this information in a second. So first things first, I want to make a quick introduction on who am I. I'm the co-founder. I'm one of the two co-founders and CEO of Field Materials AI. We are a leading AI procurement software company, and I'll talk a little bit about the company itself. In terms of my previous background, I'm a serial entrepreneur. This is my second software company that I started. Before that, I co-founded the company in retail sector, AI software in retail, that ended up acquired by PayPal. Prior to this, I'm a computer scientist by training. I pursued my PhD at Stanford in computer science and AI back in 2007 through 2011. And in terms of my connection to construction before this, first of all, I come from a family of civil engineers. My father ran a sizable general contracting business that did a lot of commercial and industrial facilities. My mom has been a controller and CFO of construction companies. My partner Victor in this business also comes from this industry, so we're not some newbies. We know the space, and obviously we've been working on field materials now for the past 4 years, so we know the space really well. So who is Field Materials? What is Field Materials? Field Materials is leading AI platform for construction procurement. We're venture capital funded. We've raised $19 million in venture capital funding. We're now processing almost $1 billion in construction material purchases during the year. So, our customers use us to automate a lot of the tasks related to procurement, purchase order creation, delivery slip processing, invoice processing, tying it back to inventory and a lot of other adjacent areas. And by reading all these documents, things like vendor quote documents, invoices documents, we have a lot of data on what material prices are. That's how we can actually tell you what how the prices are fluctuating right now throughout the year in the industry across different trades. We support over 10,000 projects, I think close to 20,000 now. We have over 13,000 vendors on our platform. We have customers across 13 construction trades and across 30 US states. So the data is pretty vast, and it's not based on some tiny numbers. So the data I'll be presenting today is quite representative of the market as a whole. All right. Today specifically, I'm going to cover 3 major trades: mechanical, which includes both HVAC and plumbing, electrical, and civil. So civil, like underground utilities, roads, and things like that. All right. So how are we going to run this is we're going to first talk about what's happening to material prices in 2025, and sort of like just talk holistically, what are the economic factors impacting material prices. Then we are going to look at each trade in particular. So we're going to start from mechanical trade, then we're going to look at the electrical trade, and then we're going to look at civil and underground utilities. And we're going to go in depth on what we're seeing month over month, how prices are changing, some of the top materials. Then we're going to give you some practical levers. So once we talk about the increases that we're seeing, we're going to talk about what can you do as a contractor to offset potential price increases to really maximize your margin in spite of the material costs going up. We're going to talk about strategies like setting up buyouts for each job. We're going to talk about capturing and tracking down rogue spending by making sure that you're actually buying from off of your pre-negotiated rates and quotes rather than from random suppliers. We're going to talk about stocking up on inventory, and then we're going to talk about how you can figure out buying through analytics where you spend money and which materials with which vendors, and how you can negotiate volume pricing with your suppliers. After that, we're going to talk about hidden costs of material procurement. Specifically, in addition to the actual material cost, there is no overhead cost of just process and material orders. And that's a lot of times neglected, but it's a big factor as well. As much as 7% of material costs are actually attributed to overhead costs. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about how AI agents can help with rising material costs. You might say, how are the two related, right? There's no obvious connection between them, but there's actually and I'm going to show you how you can use AI to really capture prices and control prices and control costs, I should say, without sort of any changes to your existing process. So that's sort of the flow. All right. With that said, I'm going to get started. Okay, so let's talk about economic factors that impact material prices. Obviously, tariffs have been top of mind throughout the whole year 2025. Why should you care, you may say? Well, because when tariffs happened, and tariffs obviously kicked in sometime earlier this year, by spring, a lot of the U.S. distributors, even if you buy from U.S. distributors, a lot of them source materials from foreign manufacturers. And those foreign manufacturers, when the tariffs go up, they eventually run out of current stock and they have to go and buy more stock from international manufacturers. And when they buy that stock from those international manufacturers, those materials will be subject to tariffs. And that's how we get increases in prices. That's kind of the obvious one. The second one is less so obvious, but even if you buy from, let's say, U.S. manufacturers, let's say you buying, switch gear and you buying from, Eaton or somebody like that, or you buying from, train company, if you buy an HVAC equipment, let's say, components of those materials may be sourced from abroad. Even things like, for example, you buying, framing materials. So you say, okay, light gauge steel. Well, guess what? The actual studs and tracks might be produced in the U.S. And rolled in the U.S., but the steel itself might be coming from Canada. And then because of the tariffs that we have with Canada, now your products, your materials go up in price. And last one, maybe less obvious one, as a U.S. manufacturer, you could even source all your materials domestically. You could say, hey, I'm buying, maybe you're doing not steel, but you're doing something like, materials made of plastic of some kind, or tile, let's say ceramic, like all of that could be produced in the US, but then, you may still be impacted by supply chain issues and just overall rising costs, because let's say if transportation costs go up, and the cost it takes to move materials from one state to another, or just that will impact your pricing. So if when tariffs happen and everyone starts kind of shipping materials because they're afraid of rising costs, it puts pressure on the entire logistics system. And then as a result, because of the increased demand on those trucks and logistics, your products that have nothing to do with international supply chain now all of a sudden become impacted, and their costs go up as well. So there are a lot of sort of non-obvious factors that may impact materials that are not obvious. Next, that sort of like sets the foundation. So why prices are going up in general. The one thing that I left aside maybe in this whole discussion is that there's also seasonal fluctuations in prices. That's what we're observing as well. I will probably not focus on that today, but there's also something that you should be aware as contractors, is that there's quite a bit of volatility in price season to season. So one of the things that we're seeing in our data is that there's definite surge in pricing in the summer compared to the winter. And so like there's definitely stuff that you can do to optimize for that. And we'll talk about it when we'll talk about the levers that you have over, over material prices. Now, next I want to talk about methodology. So I'm going to show you a bunch of graphs that will show you, kind of prices, how they change from mechanical, electrical, civil trade. But before I do that, I want to give you methodology. So we used December 2024 as the baseline. So we said, okay, let's look at all the materials that, and their pricing in December 2024, and we take it as 0%, did the prices go up compared to that baseline? And we effectively we pulled the data in November, but it's almost the same time frame. So we're looking at year to year. And then what we did, we weighted. Now the difficult part is obviously everyone buys different materials, and the materials you buy during different months is also different because depending on the projects you're doing in different seasons. So what we did is we weighted the contribution of each material, sort of like using the basket methodology, similar way to how CPI is computed on a quarterly or a monthly basis by United States. We looked at the contribution of each material by its volume within the total basket of materials purchased by contractors in each trade. So we say, okay, if I'm looking at electrical trade, let's look at the entire volume of materials that electrical contractors are buying, and let's weigh each material proportionately, like let's weigh conduits proportionately to how much they contribute to the total volume of materials. Pretty logical. And the last thing I want to mention here in terms of methodology is that we did run a webinar back in May 2025, and we did see the spike in January, April. But then what we saw is that there was actually they kind of calmed down the prices towards April and then going into May, and then they started going up in the summer. So that's something that we decided not to focus the analysis on the first half of the year because we already presented that data. And instead, we focused really on the second half of the year, so May through October of 2025, and specifically looking at November as the month when we pulled the data. So mechanical trade. So this is what we're seeing here. So again, using December as the baseline, we're seeing that it's actually a pretty steady increase in prices that we're observing. April, May, June, July, August, September, October. It's basically just steadily going up, total of 6.6%, through this month. And if you look at the materials that this is not all materials, obviously. This is just like a sample of materials from top 10, I believe, of top 20 materials that we looked at. There's a lot of things that you would expect, a lot of the sensors and a lot of the for HVAC equipment and also duct liner for HVAC systems. So it's that's what we're seeing, and pretty interesting that it's a lot higher than what the official number is for CPI. So if you look at our official numbers from the US CPI numbers, I think we're like 3% maybe inflation right now. We're seeing a lot higher spike in materials for the mechanical trade in the last 6 months. So that's 7 months here we're looking at. Let's now move on to electrical trade. So in electrical trade, we're seeing that a similar trend, but a little bit more of as I said, the materials subsided. They went up in the beginning of the year, then they kind of went down May and June. And then they started going up again in the summer. So July, August, September, October, that's what we're seeing for electrical trade. And the increase overall is smaller than in mechanical trade. So we're seeing about 4% cumulative increase. And I would expect that going into winter months, it actually might subside a little bit because, like I said, winter months tend to be a little bit better in terms of pricing. But overall, the situation electrical trade is certainly much better than what we see for mechanical trade. And then when we look at the top materials, it's the things that you would expect: a lot of wiring, generators, and more wiring. And then if you go further down the list, you see some conduits and those types of things. But this is the topmost, which makes sense because that's makes up the bulk of raw material that electrical contractors purchase. Okay, moving on to civil now. With civil, it's actually quite interesting because it's similar to mechanical trade, a pretty steady increase. Pretty rapid growth, kind of spring months, 3%, then kind of staying flat. And now we're seeing an increase again, going into the fall, October. So that's something interesting, looks different to some of the other graphs. but comparable overall increased 6%. Again, way above CPI data for civil. And when we now zoom in on specific materials that go into this analysis, again, just the top 10 that we pulled, the top 15 materials. Concrete, we see MJ gate valves, we see hydrants, we see this AVT insert and valve. So like a lot of stuff that would be going into underground utility stuff. So that's sort of the representative of the trade that we analyzed here. And just to give you high level, I think about 20 something, about 20% of our customer base is civil. So it's pretty representative data, as well as mechanical, electrical. They're sizable in terms of our population of customers we've been looking at. All right, so I'm gonna keep moving here. So that's what we're seeing. We're seeing that the materials went up in price this year a lot, much further ahead of the CPI, kind of consumer price index. That's something that is definitely something you should account for as contractors. What levers do you have to really offset this? Because you lock in this contracts and you are in this contracts for 12 months, 6 months, depending how long this contracts take. And obviously you don't want to lose money because your margins go down because now your materials are 7% or 6% more expensive than what you thought they would be. The best thing you can do, not the best, but one of the best things you could do is set up buyouts for each job. What does that mean? I'll talk about it in a second, but I'll give you first kind of a high level summary of the different tools. So you can set up buyouts for each job. You could really get a better handle on rogue spending, because even if you set up buyouts for each job, you could still have a lot of the field staff, like foremen, superintendents, that will go and buy things from random suppliers, not with the supplier who you're going to set up a buyout with. So that's, really the two strategies need to go hand in hand, because if you first set up buyouts to lock in your prices, and then you try to cut down on rogue spending to ensure that everything goes through the channels that you set up and at the prices that you set up. A third thing you can do is you can stock up on inventory at your warehouse. Not always feasible. I'm going to talk about some limitations, but that's a third option. And finally, really have to be analytical, use the data to look at where you spend the money, look at the top vendors, look at the top materials, and negotiate yearly volume discounts or prices with your vendors. So we'll talk about that. So let's talk about the first one now, first strategy, a buyout for a project. What is that? Some industries use this term, some industries don't. But as a buyout is essentially, we see it very common in framing, drywall, and civil trades. Most contractors in those trades tend to pick a supplier in the beginning of the job and say, I'm going to source all my materials from that supplier. In civil, whether it's Ferguson Waterworks or Core & Main or Rinker or somebody like that. And in framing, it might be, L&W Supply, or it could be, FBM or somebody like that. And you basically, contractors know that the prices are volatile. So they go and say, I'm going to buy all this materials. This buyout is going to be X million dollars. This is approximate volume. And I'm going to commit to buy all of this from you. The beautiful thing about it is that prices are locked in. You basically pre-negotiate the price up front, and you know that it's not going to fluctuate. I mean, sometimes they say accelerators and say after 6 months that the price accelerates, but at least you're locked in, and now you don't have the risk of prices going up. But the difficult part about buyouts is that there's usually no system that can track how much you've ordered so far and how much is remaining. A buyout is not a classical PO where you know exactly, like, hey, I'm going to buy X units. It's an approximate volume. And so, like a typical buyout is not well represented by a PO. And when you try to itemize it, it's not what you want. It's more of almost like a price reference sheet, if you will. And, it's not always easy to reinforce it because people create a spreadsheet or something like that on the side to try to verify the price. But in general, ideally, you use a system for that. Field Materials is one of them. Obviously, our platform it makes it super easy to upload that buyout, lock in the prices, and then have the system enforce that pricing for you on every invoice for that job from that vendor, essentially. Alternative is to set up what they call not ready for release order, where you say, okay, this is a classical PO. You know exact quantities that you want for the job, but now you're gonna just say, hey, I'm gonna specify dates for each material when you need them as you go from one phase to the other. That's sort of the second alternative to sort of a buyout concept. Okay, so hopefully no questions on that, and like I said, we'll have time for questions towards the end of this webinar. Now, how can you cut down on rogue spending? So the buyouts themselves is a great mechanism, but if you don't have means to cut down on rogue spending, it will do no good for you, right? And so like a very important method to cut down on rogue spending is to force the field staff to always reserve a PO for any purchase that they make. Because a lot of times what happens is that, and it happens a lot, like I said, referencing, for example, framing and civil trades, it happens a lot where you set up a buyout, you do all this, but then, you know, there will be always like, oh, we realize we need this valve or we need this, and they go and they do incidental purchases, and now this incidental purchases do not adhere to these prices, right? So now, or even worse, they go to a different supplier and buy it from someone else at a retail price, which is even worse. In order to control that and really make this, you know, create accountability in your company, you know, our recommendation is to reserve a PO for any purchase. And when the field staff goes and does this incidental purchases, they give that PO that you parked, essentially. Even if you don't know exactly, even if you don't itemize that PO, you could just reserve it, give them the number, and now when the invoice comes or they grab a delivery slip, that PO number will be on that record. And if you force the field staff to declare at the point when they reserve a PO, not only the job number to which it's tied to, but also tied to a cost code, and say, hey, this is exactly the cost code to which I'm buying this for this job. Now you have a trail. You have a trail by the time you get the invoice of what they purchased. But better yet, if you can capture by what they bought by having them take a picture of a delivery slip, now you have a full record. You know that this purchase was for this job with this cost code, and here's the delivery slip. And you can have actually AI read the items off of that slip to itemize the PO for you. You could actually have the technology read all of those line items with all the quantities, and now you have a full trail of what they bought. At that point in time, you could now, you know, verify it against your buyout, you know, make it set, you know, tied to the buyout and ensure that you pay in the buyout prices, or you simply have a better record now, and you could go back later on and say, what percent of my purchases were this type of reserve PO purchases, and you know, and what percentage of my purchases were non buyout prices. The third strategy you have, the third lever you have, is inventory. It's not an easy one because it's costly to keep inventory. I know a lot of contractors that hate inventory. That they would say, inventory is a taboo word for me. I hate it. But it is a lever. I mean, if you have, especially if you're in certain trades like MEP, mechanical, electrical, or if you're especially if you're also installation, fireproofing, fire stopping, that's one of the best things you could do. You know, your materials a lot of times are, you know, somewhat predictable, or, you know, at least they have, you know, a lot of repeatability, and that's where you could basically say, what are my most frequently purchased materials? Let's buy them in bulk and store them at the warehouse. And this way, you know, a lot of people did this during COVID, for example. They stocked up on inventory in the warehouse months and months ahead, and, you know, they avoided the risk of escalating prices. And the caveat, obviously, is that it requires a big cash investment, because now you have to pay for all this material. And, you know, even though you're not getting paid on your jobs, a lot of times you maybe it's phase 2, phase 3 of your job, and you're not going to get that milestone payment until June. Why do you have to stock up now in January or whatever month you're doing this on? And it tends to work in trades where there are fewer SKUs. So if you're in like even in mechanical electrical trade, it gets more difficult because in mechanical trade you have so many different valves and fittings and SKUs that it's not always easy to stock up on it. But like I said, if you're in installation of fireproof and fire stopping, where you have a very limited number of SKUs you're dealing with, it's a very, very easy solution that you have. And it also doesn't work in trades where the materials are bulky. So if you're in framing or structural steel or precast pipes, like utilities, there's no way you can do inventory, maybe unless you do like consumables and small things like that, which is a small percentage of your construction costs. The last strategy you have is really invest into data and analytics. This is actually interesting timing. We didn't plan on this, but we have a new module that we're launching next week. I'm going to do a shameless plug here, but we do have a new module called Pricing Intelligence that's launching literally next Tuesday. And that module allows you to see all of the trends throughout the year. Like you look at all of your material spend, and it will tell you, top vendors with whom you spend the money. You're going to see all the materials that you spend money on, the minimum and maximum prices, your actual price, potential savings you could generate. You could see the graphs, how the material, kind of changed in price throughout the year. See the breakdown across jobs, across different suppliers. Very, very powerful data that really, gets you ahead of your competition and allows you to get ahead of this prices escalating on you. And so like if you have this type of analytics or this type of data that you can put together, even if you don't use fill materials, that will get you ahead of your competition. That will certainly tell you like which materials you want to focus on, which materials you want to stock up on, or which materials you should, if you bid in on a new job, you could actually take that bomb of materials and you could look at this type of dashboard, find all the materials that you need for that job and see whether the price is volatile, whether it has been increasing, in what month you should buy the materials. Will tell you like, springtime tends to be a good month, for example, to purchase this type of material. It will give you a lot of intel that you will need to be competitive, as well as just knowing like, okay, I spent $10 million with Ferguson last year. Can I negotiate better rates with them? Right. That's a very, very important strategy that I would say every serious contractor should have in their arsenal. All right, and last thing I want to talk about in terms of just levers you have is about hidden costs of material procurement. The one thing that people don't realize is that, yes, we have escalated material costs, but there's actually, quite a bit of cost in processing material orders. Just like if you're doing, again, coming back to something like MEP trade, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, even if you're doing something like $50 million in construction volume or $30 million in construction volume, you're probably processing hundreds of POs per month. And that's a lot of just overhead costs. And I want to talk about that because it's also a factor in all of this. Think about a field person like a foreman requesting an order, whether you use like a form requisition, like a requisition form, or you have someone call the office, or you have someone email the office or text message the office. That takes time, right? It's 15 minutes for someone to do that work. And then it's also 15 minutes for somebody on the receiving end of that, like a purchaser, let's say, to then take that requisition form or take that email and turn that into a PO that you can send to the supplier. And then, the supplier might send you back an order acknowledgement form or a quote document. You have to enter it as a purchase order, right? So that all of that information, that's already another 15 minutes. Then as the material gets shipped to you, whether it's shipped to the job or ships to the warehouse, you spend another 15 minutes just receiving that order, processing, taking a picture of the packing slip, sending it via email, and someone has to track that we received it. That's, depending on how strict you are with this process, but that's another 15 minutes. Then there's random things that happen. Purchasing follows up because they say, oh, this item is on the back order. When is that coming? Oh, it's coming in 2 weeks. Oh, we had a delivery issue. You missed this item, from the order. Blended, it's another 10, 15 minutes that you need to add to the order that someone has to deal with this type of stuff. Finally, the AP team. Now, you have accounts payable team that goes and downloads the invoice or prints out the invoice, even worse. Has to cost code that invoice, job assign it, enter it into Foundation, check it against the purchase order, check the prices, check the packing slip. That's easily 20 minutes, just for additional work, and especially if you have to go and check with the PM and say, was this authorized, and so on and so forth, for something that's like incidental. When you add up all this costs, when you add up all this minutes and say, hey, if my staff person gets paid $50 an hour, that's additional $67 per PO. And if you say your PO on average is $1,000, depending on obviously the trade, but that's 7% incremental cost to your material order. So we talk about 6% increase this year. Now you add 7% overhead cost. Now altogether, when you think about your material costs, you could be saving 6 plus 7, 13% potentially in total costs if you're smart about how you buy material and how you handle this material orders. So that's something I want to point out your attention, because that's a big factor in material costs. And the next thing I want to talk about is that the issue that I'm describing here, I'm giving you concrete levers, but unfortunately, it's not always easy to put these levers in place with the current technology. And that's why, with Field Materials, we thought through this very deeply over the past 4 years since the company started. And we built AI agents that can help with a lot of the steps that I described here, tracking buyouts, setting up purchase orders, dealing with this, delivery slips, processing invoices, checking in, prices in invoices. A lot of these things can be processed with the help of AI agents. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about how this works, or how this could work for your business. Most of the procurement tasks when you buy materials are all around documents, all sorts of documents that you need to deal with. You could have a form requisition, a requisition form that you see on the left side of the screen. You could have a quote document with the actual materials. In this case, it's a switchgear quote. You'll have a delivery slip, you'll have an invoice, you have receipts. In all of the steps, you have to, you're dealing with, doing the data entry and verifying, am I paying the right price? Does it match the buyout? Does it match the PO? Doing all these things. And where AI could really help you is to cut down the rogue spending by capturing and reading all these purchase records. Because why is rogue spending happening now is because people buy things on a whim, by calling the supplier or emailing them directly. It goes, the office is not aware of that. You get an invoice, now you have to find out where it comes from, and if you can capture and have AI read those documents as those purchases are happening, you could alleviate you could solve a lot of these issues. Then we can also reduce the overhead costs. We talked about 7% of all the material costs are just overhead, entering the purchase order, entering the delivery slip, processing the invoice. This is where AI agents could really take a lot of the load off of your plate and streamline all these processes. And lastly, AI agents can really do the heavy lifting when it comes to volume pricing, because when I was talking about the buyouts, when I was talking about the analytics, knowing like which materials you buy the most at your company across all jobs throughout the year, this is where AI agents and technology can really help surface that data to you, and then empower you to do volume pricing, and then enforce that pricing, automate that verification of that pricing when you process the invoices. So let's talk a little bit about how AI agents automate data entry for POs and buyouts. why is this, why is this, how is it helping me, right? The major power of AI agents is that they can take a quote like this, which is a lumber quote in this case, and I intentionally mix all this traits so that you could all relate to it, right? 100, this lumber quote is 109 items, 7 pages long. That's a lot of, nobody bothers right now in the industry to itemize this type of quote because it's a lot of work. If you do, then you spend a lot of hours doing that. With AI, you can actually read this quote and automate the cost coding and turn that into an itemized PO in Foundation within seconds. So you upload this quote document, and then the AI agent will read it, itemize it, all the quantities, all the names, all the units of measurements, the unit prices, and voila, you have this itemized PO in your Foundation system, right? That's what AI agents can really help with. And then you could use this as a buyout to request specific items when you need them, or you could now use the itemized prices to verify those prices when you get invoiced for them. So, and you have access to that attached quote at all times. The second thing we AI agents can really help when it comes to procurement is the delivery slips. We talked about delivery slips and how a lot of this rogue spending is happening because the field staff will just go and buy something and you're not aware of what they bought. Well, if you use this flow where you reserve a PO through the mobile app, and then you have the field staff take a picture of that, take a quick picture of that delivery ticket. Now AI can actually read that delivery ticket and read the PO number and read all the received materials and quantities. So now when you get invoiced for that material, you know exactly what they purchased. And so office staff sees all the received quantities, see what was ordered, what was received, and easily report issues even to vendors. The next thing that I want to show you is the invoicing. Obviously, invoice is paramount to procurement and purchasing, and that's where a lot of I would say rubber hits the road in terms of enforcing prices and controlling prices and things like that. The dream has always been that three-way match, three-way validation. Well, with AI agents, I would say, we've always had this OCR, but OCR is very limited what it can do. It only verifies the total and the number and whatnot. Very simple things. Here, AI agent can actually read the entire document from top to bottom, line item by line item, and compare that to your purchase order, match each line item in the invoice to the purchase order, verify the unit price, verify that it actually has been received, and validate all the quantities against received and ordered quantities, and really automate that data entry of that invoice into Foundation. So all of that work can be done by an AI agent, and now you can enforce your buyout prices. You can automate a lot of that verification work. And that just illustrates this. So AI agent extracts from the invoice PO number, materials, quantities, unit prices, and then matches them up to PO and validates all these quantities and flags mismatches for you. All right, and then one of the final things that now I want to talk about is how is this different, what I'm presenting to you with AI agents sort of automating a lot of this validation, a lot of this cost validation. How is it different from OCR? And it's fundamentally different. Like, this technology really became possible in the last 2 to 3 years. What is it? December 2022 when ChatGPT came out, which was exactly 3 years ago. And before that, we only had OCR. And OCR is very dumb. It's sort of like you have to create a template and say, oh yeah, I'm going to find this invoice number in that corner, this many pixels from the top, this many pixels from the right. It doesn't interpret data. It doesn't understand what data is. It doesn't understand that this is units of measurement. It doesn't understand that this row represents the material name. It doesn't have any of that knowledge. AI agent is way, way smarter. Think of it as like a virtual analyst or intern that you train to do a specific task. We have, now close to 20 different AI agents to read different types of construction documents, everything from invoices, delivery tickets, concrete tickets, trucking tickets, you name it, receipts, and it knows what to expect in the document. It reads the text and interprets it. It says, okay, I see PO number, and I also see customer reference number. One of these two fields probably means the PO number, and I'm going to pick one of them based on my knowledge of what it should look like. It interprets the visual layout. It looks at it and says, okay, I see a table. It has a header. The header of that column says quantity, so that's the quantity column, and that's where I'm going to find the quantity of that material. And it was trained on thousands of documents to solve a specific task. So when you think about something like trucking tickets, it has been trained on thousands of trucking tickets to know exactly how to read the load off of the trucking tickets. So it's very, very powerful, much more powerful technology than anything we had before. And the final piece I want to say is that all of that becomes possible, obviously, not only because of the AI, but because of the tight integration that we have with Foundation. All this data like jobs, the vendors, the cost codes, the cost types, the general ledger accounts, the equipment, all of that can be read from the Foundation, synced from Foundation, and then the POs and invoices can be easily exported back to Foundation. So you don't end up duplicating that data entry, and all the data is flowing smoothly between the two systems. And finally, I just want to say that this is you have a mobile app in the hands of a foreman. This is what we provide to the field staff. This is how they request materials, reserve PO numbers, scan the packing slips, scan the receipts. And you have the desktop software for the office where you can review the orders, review the delivery tickets, upload quotes, and set up purchase orders, verify invoices, and things like that. And we automate all the communication with the suppliers. Supplier participation is completely optional in this case. That's our platform. Just maybe I'll conclude with that. We are again, the reason why we see all this data is because we support contractors across 13 trades now, and we have all these different modules, RFQs to request quotes, compare quotes, analyze quotes using AI, create purchase orders from field requisition forms, from quote documents, from bill of materials, delivery slips when they process the tickets themselves, the delivery tickets, invoices, all the automation around three-way verifications against buyouts, against purchase orders, even overhead costs and things like that. Prefabrication, if you MEP contractor and you prefabricate, we have a module for that. Receipts and inventory finally. Those are our modules, and pricing intelligence is the newest module that we're launching next week. And with that, I'd like to wrap it up. So I think we have exactly about 11 minutes, so that's hopefully enough time to take questions and do the final remarks.
Yep, we should have a poll popping up here in just a minute. There it goes. So for all of you online here, if you could please just pop in an answer.
And also, if you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to post them into the question section of the webinar.
Yeah, looks like we do have one question there at the moment. And Blaze is asking, what data sources drive these insights? Is it publicly available data, proprietary sources, or a...
Yeah, I can answer the question. No, this is all proprietary data, meaning that it's all anonymized data from our customers. So what we did is we pulled, we segmented customers into trades, and then we looked at all of the materials that we see for them, and basically aggregated that data to present this insights here. So, but it is a representative sample in the sense that we're looking at hundreds of millions of materials purchased throughout the year, and probably hundreds of thousands of purchase orders that we've analyzed.
Great.
This is.
Do you have any projections past October?
Any projections past October? What we do, I mean, it would be projections are always difficult. What I can say is that I definitely think that the materials tend to subside in the winter. So I do expect that November and December will actually be a pretty good months. January, unless we have some crazy tariffs again hit in the market. Then I think the prices might spike. But in the absence of external events, political events, I think the prices should be pretty good in the coming next couple months. But they will certainly start spiking again towards the spring.
Okay. Still have quite a few people logged in here. Any other questions for Eldar? I'm not seeing a whole lot popping in.
Let's give it another minute to see if maybe.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's really interesting, that the whole climate around, I mean, just the overall economy as it is today, but as it relates to material acquisitions, it's interesting. Everybody needs to take advantage of anything that they can to get an edge, to remain competitive. It's just how it is.
No, I mean the interesting thing that we're seeing is it's the tariffs, but the other thing that I mentioned in the beginning that I think everyone should realize is the seasonal volatility. Is even if in the absence of high inflations or in the absence of tariffs, you have to be aware of seasonal fluctuations, and you have to pay attention to when you see surge in prices. Like I said, summertime tends to have a lot of surge in pricing, and anything that you can do to actually buy materials not in the hot season, but buy them or lock in prices at the low season will position you to have better margins. That's sort of another insight that I would give, just outside of tariffs and inflation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right. I'm not seeing any other questions come up here. So you must have addressed everything everybody wanted to see and hear throughout the presentation. So Eldar, I want to thank you again for joining us today as a follow-up to a previous webinar that we had done a few months ago. For all of you in attendance, I appreciate you guys coming and spending part of your day here with us. And again, post-webinar, we'll do a wrap-up here, and we'll be sending out the recording as well as some content links to your email that you use to register within probably 24 to 48 hours. Until then, look forward to seeing you all back here for the next webinar. I'm not sure exactly when that is, but it is coming up soon. So until then, good afternoon.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for hosting me, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
Have a great day.